Morning, everyone. Welcome to our event today. I'm Kurt Couchman. I'm Vice President of Public Policy at Defense Priorities. We're a realist foreign policy organization, and we're trying to change the laws, change the policy, and make it serve America's interests better than it does right now. So today we're talking about our relationships in the Middle East generally. The focus will be on Saudi Arabia, but I want to preface it a little bit with some of the constitutional and legal framing. Under the Constitution, it says right there, all legislative powers here in granted shall be vested in Congress. So what are legislative powers? Is the policy setting. Over time, Congress has delegated a lot of those responsibilities to the executive branch for some good reasons and for some less good reasons. Now, since the 9/11 attacks, there's been a lot of additional delegation in the context of the global war on terror. There was the 2001 AUMF, which was passed by Congress within 3 days after the 9/11 attacks. And it was focused on those who were responsible for the 9/11 attacks. We went into Afghanistan and Pakistan and took care of most of that specific problem pretty quickly. And then we stayed to try to rebuild Afghanistan, or rather build it. It had never been sort of the sort of country that had the institutions as we had in Europe after World War II. And then, of course, there was the 2002 AUMF against the threat posed by Iraq, which was really the threat posed by Saddam Hussein's government in Iraq. And you could argue that after the government fell and Saddam was captured, that was effectively mission accomplished, as Bush famously got banned for. And then we stayed. Title 10 of the U.S. Code, Chapter 16, the Security Cooperation Chapter. There's a lot of stuff in there. Some of it predated 9/11, but a lot has been added since then. Especially in the FY 2016 NDAA, which was passed literally a month before President Obama left office, there was a significant expansion of authorities there. There's Section 1203 authority, so-called. It's from the, I think it's the 2014 NDAA. It's the support of special operations to combat terrorism. And then, of course, there are a lot of claims about inherent Article 2 authorities. Now, about the President's ability to move troops around and conduct operations that he considers to be in the national interest. Now, the fact that those authorities are being exercised doesn't mean that Congress can't oversee them. Doesn't even mean that Congress can't pull them back in if Congress thinks that's appropriate. I've got a piece, you should check it out. It's called No Presidential Powers Beyond Congress. And it argues that all executive branch powers are subject to whatever limitations and conditions Congress wants to impose, and that's through the necessary and proper clause. So Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18 of the Constitution. When it comes to the Supreme Court, they've got a mixed record with respect to recognizing and validating congressional supremacy in policymaking. But probably we should stop talking the legal stuff and transition to the regional dynamics. There's a lot more we can say about that. But the basic facts, there's obviously this Sunni Shiite competition going on, but it's not just that. It's Arab, Persian, Kurd, Turk. There's different factions of the religions. I'm not the expert that should talk a whole lot about that. There's a big difference between monarchies. There are absolute monarchies in the region. There are constitutional monarchies. And then there's democracies with a variety of levels of maturity, you might say. Israel is sort of the best democracy in the region. And then you've got countries with varying degrees of democratic institutions in Egypt, Iraq, Turkey, even to some extent in Iran. Yemen, of course, is a mess. There could be a vote this week on ending U.S. assistance to the Saudi-UAE-backed coalition in Yemen, so that vote will take place in the Senate. I've heard as early as tomorrow, potentially. Of course, we have U.S. bases throughout the region, major bases in Turkey, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, and Kuwait. We also have free trade agreements. Military, of course, isn't the only tool of statecraft. It's among diplomacy, intel, trade, but we also have free trade agreements with Bahrain, Israel, Jordan, and Oman. Our speakers today are going to get into some discussion about what we've done, why we've done it, and why some different options might make more sense going forward. But I think it's important to know that whether you're looking at population or GDP or military expenditure, there's kind of a rough balance of powers that exists in the region already. I mean, there's kind of three population centers. You've got Egypt with 96 million, about 80 million each in Iran and Turkey, and then Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Yemen have between 25 and 40 million basically, but of course those populations aren't homogenous, right? So even Iran, which, you know, there's a lot of things the government does there that aren't good, but only 61% of Iranians are Persian, right? The rest are ethnic minorities. And so they have kind of some challenges internally. When it comes to military spending, you've got Saudi Arabia leading the pack at 70 billion, Israel's got almost 17 billion, Turkey's got 18 billion, and Iran is 15.5 billion. So, you know, there's a lot of different factors that go into all of this. It seems like no country is poised to dominate the Middle East, and we can help with that, but I want to turn it over first to Danny Davis to talk about military aspects about what we've done over there. He is an Army veteran. He served combat tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. He's done training, advising, and assisting. He's done lots of things. He wrote a famous report on how the Afghanistan war was going. And then after him, we're going to have Ben Friedman talk about what our interests in the region are, and Danny's going to talk about this too, and how we can better accomplish those interests at acceptable costs, acceptable risk, and maybe even be more effective at doing it. So with that, let me turn it over to Danny Davis.
Thanks, y'all. Always consider it a privilege and honor to talk here. The staff members of Congress here at the Capitol building is something I'm always grateful for. I do want to talk, share a little bit about some of my experiences and observations that I've made over more than 2 decades in the military. As Kurt mentioned, I had a total of 4 combat deployments, 2 each in Afghanistan and Iraq. Going back in Iraq to Desert Storm and high-intensity conflict, classic counterinsurgency, military trainer on the Iraq-Iran border, and then kind of a mixture of several of these other things throughout all of these periods. So I've got a pretty broad variety of things. I've had a lot of time on the ground, spent I think 8 years of my life overseas on the ground in various different countries. So I've got a pretty decent, broad understanding of how things impact on the ground there. And I think that's one of the most crucial things to understand is that oftentimes people in Washington have really grand ideas and good ideas about what they think should happen and what they would like to happen. But if some strategic thought can't happen physically on the ground, then it's never going to work. So you can't try to accomplish something on a strategic level that is impossible on the tactical level. And that really plays into a lot here in the Middle East. So just kind of a real brief summary of so why is this area even important? Because a lot of times we just accept that it is without even thinking about it, and that kind of leads to the implication or the understanding that we have to continue on to this, that understanding, because if we don't, then bad things would happen unsubstantiated. So going back into the Cold War in the immediate aftermath of World War II, the Middle East was a huge important area. It was an important area during World War II because of all the oil that was going on there, which was necessary for all the combatants, and it was a big major contention that they fought over even then. And of course, the control of that and the influence both from the USSR and from the Western Alliance, NATO, the United States in particular, that was also a really important area. So we didn't want anyone to dominate that because it had a chokehold on us. And we saw graphically what that looked like in 1973, the early 70s, during the Carter administration, when the Saudi Arabia put a blockade on us and they blocked a lot of our oil. They stopped selling it. Big, huge problem, of course. It's a big problem here in the United States, which completely changed or affected our economy and exposed just how important it was that we had to come to an accommodation that worked with it, especially with Saudi Arabia, of course. But then the situation now is certainly different in major ways in terms of energy, because while Saudi Arabia continues to have the oil that it has and be able to pump, I believe, up to 12 million barrels a day, which is pretty substantial, the United States actually right now is pumping even more than that. And we have the prospect that that's going to continue on for a while, though probably not forever. But that does change dramatically the impact and the vulnerability that we have specifically from Saudi Arabia. Now, I will tell you that there seems to be a common understanding, and I've seen it at the administration level and certainly throughout Congress, this belief that we need Saudi Arabia almost as much as we did in 1973. And that is definitely not the case, not just in energy, but also in the security realm. Because President Trump has several times mentioned that we can't put at risk this $100 billion deal because otherwise they'll go to China and whatever. The fact is they can't just go to China because all of their infrastructure is designed around U.S. primarily and Western military technology, and those things you can't just go to Walmart, or actually I'll go to Target instead and keep going. You can't do that because their planes won't keep flying, their tanks won't keep driving, their ships won't keep flying, and their troops won't maintain their proficiency in training if they don't have continued access to the United States. We have enormous influence over Saudi Arabia right now. So it's not just that they'll threaten to go and buy from someone else because we could say, have at it, good luck to you, because they would have to completely reorient their military. It would take probably decades to exchange that, and that was only if you could do it sequentially. But of course, we're not going to just say, yeah, sure, we'll help you transition somewhere else. So that gives us leverage over it, and that really has a lot of impact right now about the Yemen situation. And so I'm sure we're going to talk more about this, but there is nothing in the Yemen war right now that is in America's interest. That has been almost exclusively something that we have done to placate Saudi Arabia to help them so that they'll do some other things that we want them to do. Most often it's claimed that they'll help with counterterrorism operations, etc. The fact is Saudi Arabia is an autocratic nation that looks first and foremost after their own interests. And if they want to help us do something with Iran, then they'll do that. But if they want to do something elsewhere that might not even be in our interest, they'll do that too. And certainly we saw that with the Khashoggi situation. They could care less about human rights or anything else. That was a personal issue with what all evidence appears was from the Saudi Crown Prince. And he's going to take it. It doesn't matter what our values and what our interests are. Well, the fact is we don't have to placate that. We don't have to submit to that because we're in the upper position on that. And when we do something that's actually counter to our interests and definitely counter to our values, that's something that we should not continue doing. We don't need to do. We actually have the influence to pressure Saudi Arabia to come closer to our values and to actually, we should look after our own interests just as much as they look after their own interests. And where our interests align, then we should continue working with them. Because we can't just say, okay, well, you did something bad, so we're not going to work with you guys anymore. Because we would not be doing business with a lot of people if we had that attitude. Because we don't get to pick and choose who's in charge of the world. But our overriding requirement is that we have to take care of American interests and look after the American people. And so we have to do business where it makes sense, and we have to push back where it makes sense. Specifically, what I think in terms of what we ought to do with Saudi Arabia right now is the best signal that we can send is to completely end our support for that war in Yemen. Because that will be the unequivocal signal that we are going to do what's in the best interest of our people across the board. And we're not going to continue to do things that actually run counter to our interest. Supporting that Yemen war does not help us. It actually harms us far more than most people realize. Because whether we're actually just getting intelligence support, we're refueling ammunition, weapons, all that, but we're not physically pulling triggers. To the people in the region, I assure you, it makes no difference at all. It's part and parcel. It's all in together. That's why they call it a coalition. And there's millions of people. You saw the pictures that's been splashed all over the media in days. That's what Saudi Arabia is causing with this. Because this situation has no military solution. Saudi Arabia will never militarily defeat whatever it is that they're going after, whether it's the Houthis, whether it's the government, whether it's the Shia, whatever they're actually going after, it's not entirely clear. But they're never going to solve that militarily. It has to be done diplomatically, it has to be done politically, and the United States should completely withdraw our support because it's not necessary for our national security. And that's the best way you're going to get to a ceasefire. That's the best way you're going to get to a negotiated settlement, because our continued involvement is actually what's helped perpetuate that. You pull that back, and now Saudi Arabia has a great deal more motivation to reach a negotiated settlement, to shut that thing off, just like we did in Vietnam, quite frankly. It can be done, and if you give the right motivation, it will be done. So I'm going to actually pass off to Ben.
Before you do that, could you talk just a little bit about how after the Cold War we tried a great experiment and how did it go?
Which great experiment? Make sure I'm going to say it right.
Coin.
Oh, okay. Well, a couple of things, actually. I didn't mean to mention one other thing. There's also this belief that we can't leave the Middle East because if we do, it'll cause this great chasm and vacuum that will cause all kinds of bad things. Well, the fact is, after the 1973 embargo and all the problems that Carter had, during almost the entire 8 years of the Reagan administration, we had almost no involvement in the Middle East at all, other than the Cobalt Towers disaster, which Reagan recognized pretty quick was a disaster, and once he withdrew them, we did not go back in. So we had almost no involvement that entire period. And the Middle East was chaos then, before that it was chaos, during that it's chaos afterwards. Our presence or our absence does nothing because there is no nation that's strong enough in there to dominate the rest militarily. So they're all going to continue to fight, whether we're there or whether we're not. So we don't need to continue to fight in that situation. And of course, as we've seen throughout, the post 9/11 period, with all our counterinsurgency attempts to reform nations in our image, or even if you don't go for that, just say, well, we want to bring, stability. We don't bring stability. We take sides, and we, for a period of time, will help one side be ascendant. But it's literally the classic thing of putting your fist in a bucket of water. Well, I'm big and strong, and wherever I put my fist, the water will dissipate. They will move. It will have an impact. The minute that I pull my fist out, that water closes back in like it was never there. And I have seen that graphically and personally in both Iraq and Afghanistan since 2009. In places where we've withdrawn, it's as though we were never there. And I saw that to my great angst, frankly, in certain specific areas in eastern Afghanistan after the surge. Actually, I was there during the height of the surge, and as we started to pull back troops, it was painful to see all these American troops, like in Helmand, for example, and in the eastern Kunar province, where we had suffered quite a lot of casualties, had a bunch of fighting, but once we drew down and withdrew, it was the same as it was before we got there. So we lost all those troops for absolutely nothing. It didn't diminish or increase the Taliban or the insurgency altogether. In fact, you could actually argue that it helped increase it because it was a target for people to come from all over the world. But it definitely had no impact, certainly no positive impact on U.S. national security, but it is a net loss because it cost us trillions of dollars. And now that there's troops that are going to be having to have medical help for the rest of their lives for decades that didn't have to have that before. And that's going to be something we're going to be paying for. We can't undo that, but we can stop making things worse.
Thanks, Dan. And if you guys didn't notice, we are recording this prepared portion here. We're going to turn off the camera when we get to Q&A, so you guys can speak freely and not have to worry about being on the record and so on.
Okay, thanks for coming out. I want to talk about what U.S. interests in the Middle East are and what they have to do with Yemen. Let me just say, as a starting point, that Yemen is a humanitarian disaster that we have facilitated by aiding the Saudi and UAE military campaign there. We haven't gotten anything out of it in a security sense. I think actually we've lost something in a material or security sense. I think that exemplifies a larger problem in U.S. foreign policy, which is that we make deals with the devil that actually don't benefit us. In other words, there are times to make these sort of hard choices and deal with regimes like what we see in Saudi Arabia, but this isn't one of those times, and often when we're told it is, in fact, it's not. Realism, which Kurt mentioned, which is our sort of philosophy, defense priorities, realism means appreciating that you have to make tragic choices in international politics. And that's true, but it also leads realism to the belief that our power advantages in the United States, our safety, limit those choices, limit the situation where you're stuck in that situation where you have to say, well, I'm going to put up with Stalin's crimes because it's World War II and we need to defeat Nazi Germany. Because we tend to underestimate our security, we too often think we have to support oppressive regimes, when in fact our security is a luxury that lets us be virtuous in terms of promoting, at least being consistent with liberal values more often than we're told in Washington, D.C. So what are major U.S. interests in the Middle East? I think there's basically three. One is that we don't want there to be a dominant power or regional hegemon. One is that we don't want an oil price shock. And one is that we don't want, a third is that we don't want terrorist havens. Arms sales, by the way, are not on the list. If they were, as Danny said, it doesn't seem likely that the Saudis could just walk away from doing business with the United States on arms, even if we were a little harsher with them on their record, human rights record, and on what they're doing in Yemen. And by the way, there's no $110 billion like the president is talking about. It's more like $15 billion, and they actually haven't gone through with the biggest chunk of that, which is to buy the THAAD missile defense system yet. They may yet, but and if they don't consummate that deal, then it's going to be a lot less than $15 billion. So the $110 billion is just a bunch of PR type statements of intent that they threw together to get a big number. Okay, first big U.S. interest is preventing a hegemon from dominating the region. This is a traditional way of thinking about what the United States is doing in all the regions of the world that we've tended to care most about, Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. In the Middle East, the fear is a little bit unique that a dominant power could gather up enough oil wealth to become sort of a big, if not a superpower, a great power that could either coerce Western countries through its control of oil markets, or actually become a more direct military threat. No state in the Middle East is remotely close to doing that. Power is well distributed among the states in the region, including Turkey, Israel, Egypt, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. Neither Iran nor Saudi Arabia would gain much if their preferred side won in Yemen in terms of the ability to project power further. The Saudi military has performed poorly there, despite its massive military and government. In fact, the UAE, massive military spending, that is, the UAE has actually been more effective. There are a lot of obstacles to Iranian hegemony in the region. Being a Shia country is one of them. The fact that its military is what we could say, what we call coup-proofed, meaning that it's designed in order to maintain internal security against other elements of the military in a sort of set of concentric circles. That makes it bad at projecting power abroad. So the Iranians write checks, but their military is not good at going places and doing things. That doesn't seem likely to change, regardless of U.S. sanctions. Then the second big interest the United States has is to avoid a big shock to global oil markets. Danny mentioned the oil embargo in 1973. I think the first thing to say about that is to layer on what Danny said. Things have changed a great deal since then. Not only are we a big energy producer now, but number one, we have decent-sized public and private reserves against the public strategic petroleum reserve was created as a way to deal with that problem, and the major oil companies also have private reserves, so we have some slack in the system that can absorb an oil price shock should that occur. Besides that, economists have written about how in the United States a much smaller portion of people's income goes to energy than it used to in the 70s. So that means that people's spending habits are not going to be as effective by big increases in oil prices and much more. So that's not something we have to worry about to the extent we once did. And besides that, it's very hard to see what Saudi Arabia would do, period, to create an oil price shock. They can't shut down oil production. They can adjust their production levels, but that's not going to cause a shock. They can't shut down production because they need those sales more than anyone, more than consumers. Yemen, taking this to Yemen, Yemen's oil reserves are minor. It didn't pump oil for a few years. It didn't have any effect on global markets, really. There's nothing really related to that big U.S. interest in the Middle East at stake in the conflict in Yemen. The Houthis have fired some missiles at shipping in the Gulf, and that's disruptive. But number one, the way to get that to stop is to end the war. They're firing missiles and shipping because of the Saudi actions, UAE actions, the blockade. Like that or not, it's probably going to end once the war does. Besides that, it's actually not having any major effect on global commerce or oil prices. And thirdly, the United States Navy is very capable of keeping shipping lanes open if it comes to it. Third major interest of the United States in the region is, of course, counterterrorism. When I say counterterrorism, I don't mean that we can get to the point where there's zero concern about terrorism from the Middle East. I don't think that's realistic. But we can, mostly through partnerships with the countries there, keep terrorism down to lower levels than we could not tolerate in the past. We can work through local intelligence services, and if need be, as we've done in Yemen for several years, really going back to the middle of the Obama administration, we can have raids and drone strikes. That's not a cure-all, it's not a panacea. It doesn't really solve the problems that underlie political instability and terrorism, but it does disrupt our operations. We had a record of almost 300 drone strikes in Yemen under the first year of the Trump administration, which was, I think, more than a 50% increase over the Obama administration's final year, which was already a big ratchet up from the prior year. So, and I think what those numbers go to show, among other things, is that the United Arab Emirates, which has done some stuff to help us deal with Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and Yemen, and the Saudis, who have done less, aren't really doing a lot of good. We're carrying the weight, the counterterrorism weight in Yemen. The war, the civil war in Yemen, and particularly the fracturing of the southern side, which there's no southern side really. There's a series of militias, some sponsored by the Saudis, some organized by the UAE. There's southern separatists who don't want there to be a national government. They work with Salafists. There's a melange of often violently contentious groups there on that side fighting the Houthis. That circumstance has been conducive to an Al-Qaeda presence and even more recently an ISIS presence, although we always have to be a little careful when we say that because it's not like they're controlled by the main Islamic State. It's often sort of a branding decision by local jihadists. So if you want to have a maximally effective counterterrorism policy in Yemen, I think it's to negotiate or to allow the United Nations envoy to negotiate an end to the war, or at least an end to the outside intervention of the war. That's the fastest way, I think, to limit problems there. Yemen is going to remain a problem, there's no question. It's a fractious state. It's been that way for most of its existence. War there, sort of civil war sparked to some extent in the late aughts. It's continued since 2010. As I say, the South is, one side of the country is fractured into a bunch of pieces. The Houthis fell out with their allies, Saleh supporters. So it doesn't seem likely to be very stable anytime soon, but the better they can do in terms of being centrally governed and having a government with an optimum power, whoever it is, the more successful I think the counterterrorism outcome will be. So overall, I think the war that the United States has backed through intelligence support, refueling, and arms sales to the Saudis has in fact hurt our interests somewhat. I don't think we have very big material security stakes in Yemen, but on balance, this campaign has been negative. And I think that is one reason why the United States should cut off military support to the Saudis, not just by ending refueling, but by ending intelligence support and stopping the arms sales that go directly to their ability to drop bombs on Yemen, even if we don't cut off all our arms sales. I think besides that, under any circumstance, what's happening in Yemen, the massive death of civilians through the these rather indiscriminate airstrikes, which I'm sure you've all read about, the outbreak of cholera, the risk of mass starvation. Under any circumstance, that would be tragic in the sense that it would be a horrible thing that maybe could have some larger security benefit. But given that our support for the Saudis and the UAE and their allies there isn't actually advancing U.S. interests, it's probably hurting it somewhat, I think the war is just sort of offensive and sordid, morally offensive. And that's why I think we should press for for the Saudis and the UAE and others to stop intervening, and that could at least lead to a settlement of some sort. So I'll leave it there.